All right, I think that's gonna work better. Sorry about that last minute adjustment. My phone was being weird. Uh, how is everyone? I hope you're all having a good night. I had to run downstairs and get coffee because my throat started getting sore, and I may be drinking more coffee than usual. The other thing is, I'm going to have to apologize for the slide when I get there, but there are a couple of slides in this that are very empty because finding information was way harder than I expected it to be. Um, and we'll get to that. Uh, why does it say? Hang on a moment. Oh, jeez Louise. Also, if I disappear, we're gonna blame it on I'm gonna blame it on the AC because it decided to fritz out earlier this week. I think I mentioned it last time, but this week we are going to be talking about Ranger's Apprentice, book one. I was gonna try to get books one and two in, but I didn't get the second book in. That was my fault. It was mostly due to laziness. But I do have a fun story about the Ranger's Apprentice. So when I was getting my master's degree, I had to spend some time in the library, and there was a kid that came in looking for Percy Jackson, and specifically the Lightning Thief, and it wasn't on the shelf; it had been checked out, and he was not interested in any other book. But I had been reading the Ranger's Apprentice since they started coming out, and I really liked them. So I went and grabbed the first one and said, "Well, you might like this. It's not based on myth, but it's still an adventure story." And I don't know if he actually checked it out, but he did actually read the back cover. So like I'm taking that as a win, and it makes me happy. So yeah, I really like this series. As per usual, this is meant to entertain and inform. I don't hold any of the rights to the works described, and I hope you enjoy. And that did nothing. Come on, you silly thing. There we go. So, Ranger's Apprentice, The Ruins of Gorlan by John Flanagan. Real talk, I have to look at this title every single time because I add letters into Gorlan. I keep trying to call it Gorlian, like Garlian. And this is before I played Final Fantasy XIV and knew what a Garlian was. But yes, so the Ruins of Gorlan. So publishing details. It was originally published in 2004 by Random House in Australia and New Zealand. So this was news to me. I just assumed it came out in 2005 because that's when the Scholastic book came out, and that's the one I have. But no, it was originally published in Australia and New Zealand, and then eventually got published overseas. It is the first book in the Ranger's Apprentice series. The Ranger's Apprentice now has two spin-off series. One, I believe, is a direct sequel series, which I haven't read any of, and the other one is a true spin-off. Which, now that I think about it, I don't think I've read that one either. I should probably do that. I really like the way these are written, so I should probably just read all of them. So other covers. I couldn't find the original cover, but this is the second edition cover. In Australia, this is illustrated by Jeremy Reston. Fun note, the illustrators for this book, I can't find much information on them, whether they are the illustrators for the American covers or the illustrators for the Australian covers. I had problems finding much information at all. I did find that Jeremy Rustin also did the covers for the Chain of Charms series. But I haven't read that, so I can't speak for that series. But he's also an Australian illustrator. So this is the one I have. This is the 2005 Scholastic cover by John Blackford. I never realized how much trouble semi-common names were until I started trying to look for this cover artist. I did find out he also did the cover for Garth Nix's Keys to the Kingdom series. At least one set of the covers. I want to say it's the original set of the covers. I know it's the Scholastic set of the covers, which have, like, again, photos of, like, real people with illustrations behind. So, about the author. John Flanagan is an Australian author who worked in advertising and television. It's gonna be one of those days, guys. I got the Sailor Scouts wrong today, so, like, it is a day for me. He originally wrote short stories for his son to encourage him in reading. Those short stories became this first book, which I didn't know that originally when I read it, but hearing that doesn't surprise me with the way it's written. And it, as I said before, he has the original series, which is Ranger's Apprentice, and then 2 spin-offs, which are Brother Band and Royal Ranger? I believe it's Brother... I know Brother Band is one of them, and I think the other is called Royal Ranger. Look, college cut into my reading because I couldn't just, like, buy them from the Scholastic Book Fair. So what do you need to know? It is a third... Oh, I didn't rearrange these. Oops. It is a third-person omniscient story. It is an adventure book. It is a low magic fantasy. We'll get into why I need to apologize about that in a bit. And it has multiple perspectives, which does tie into third-person omniscient. So your main character, Will, is one of 5 wards of Castle Redmont. He's turning 15. Him and the other wards are turning 15 when the book begins, and he is the only one with no memory or knowledge of his parents. So all of the wards are orphans. All of them are the same age, but Will has been there since he was a baby, and no one knows basically anything about... Well, correction. No one knows anything about his parents. The interesting thing about the wards is you've got 3 boys and 2 girls, so there's a dynamic there. He is small, curious, and witty. He isn't perfect, to be fair, with the exception of, like, one character in this first book. None of them are perfect, but all of the wards have the being really good at a thing buff. I kind of want to call it the orphan buff, but that sounds terrible. They're not Mary Sue's because they all have some issues, but all of them have that, you know, oh, you aren't good at this one thing because you're wonderful at this other thing, as opposed to just being kind of average at everything. But it's a children's book. It's a nice thought, and it works well for the characters. You don't get a huge Mary Sue feel. Will is the closest. Well, no, there is another character that is closer to a Mary Sue than Will, but yeah, Will's mouth gets him in trouble. To be fair, Will's mouth sometimes gets him out of trouble, too. So it is a multiple perspective book. Usually there is a clear delineation between these perspectives. There is a paragraph break or a chapter break, or at the very least there's like a little tilde or italics, or there's something. But sometimes there's just like a single sentence in italics that you're like, oh, this is a thought from this character in the middle of like narrative description. The other thing is you have many points of view, both from like the Baron and the Battle Master and the Halt, who is the Ranger. But your primary second point of view is Horace. Horace is another of the wards who gets into battle school. And he is Will's bully. But he is your secondary main character? So going along with that, it's third person omniscient. It's typically for comedic purposes. Sometimes the narrator will pop into the mind of the other characters in the room, and you know, you'll understand, oh, the Duke is frustrated that no one understands his jokes, or like Tug, which is a pony. Tug will share a look with Will, and like the narrator will put in, clearly Tug is thinking this, and it's like, oh yeah, sure, the horse is thinking that, but like there's no way you could know the horse is thinking that. And I forgot how much I like this perspective when it's used for wit and comedy, when it's not being highbrow and stuffy and political, and which has been my most recent dealing with it, when it's used for laughs, for little wink and nods to the reader. Like, even when things are stressful, there's a wink and a nod and kind of like, hey, it's okay, you're reading this, don't worry, you know more than the characters do. So at all times, with the exception of Halt, you kind of feel like you know more than the characters. I will say I found, well, clearly from when it was published, but I read this book while I was in my Lord of the Rings, Red Wall, Dritz do Uden phase. So a book about rangers, right up my alley. But out of all of those, this was the most light, even when serious things happened. So, it is an adventure novel. It takes place over the time span of roughly a year. It is very much the beginning of a coming-of-age series. Will does grow in a year, but he doesn't lose the fact that he is a bratty 15-year-old. Not completely, because he is in fact still a 15-year-old. Something to be aware of that goes with this is there are like 3-month or 1-month time skips throughout the book. It's not a problem for me. I don't need them to tell me every detail, because I don't need to know that, you know, for the last 3 months, Will has practiced archery, and here is how he has practiced archery every single day. You want to give me a time skip and be like, look how stinking accurate this boy is. That's what happens with 3 months worth of practice, and I will believe you. I don't need to see it myself. I can see the results and extrapolate. It is a low magic fantasy. It is semi-realistic. I say that partially because of the Mary Sue of it all. But it has very little magic and monster elements. Not none, but few. It goes out of its way to explain some things that are perceived as magic. There is a part pretty early in the beginning when Halt takes on Will as his apprentice, where Will makes the comment that he just assumed like rangers could appear out of nowhere, like magic, and it's like, no, No, we have these cloaks that help, they're a modeled pattern, so they help disguise our overall shape and movement, and they're not actually black. They're like shades of gray and green. Things that help in a forest, or that would help in a grassland, Um, it's, if I remember correctly, as the series goes on, the fantasy magic elements get less. It becomes much more of a almost a historical fiction in the telling of it, but it takes place on a non-existent place. So more of just a fiction in a fantasy locale as opposed to a like hard fantasy. And we'll get into why that's a little weird for me in a second. Oh, I forgot kids' books. I fly through them. I'm so sorry, guys. So recommendations for adventure novels. I had to put it on here, but Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. It's an adventure novel. It's very close to The Ranger's Apprentice. You've got teenage boys on adventures. I will say The Ranger's Apprentice, most of your adventure is much closer to a single setting, although that does change in the last third. But it is a closer to home type thing. Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine for a more girl-centered version. I will say, in this book, the girls don't play much of a role in The Ranger's Apprentice. In the later books, they do. And it's really funny. Clearly, I read too many books that have, like, knights and boar hunts and things like that. Because I'm like, oh, we're doing a boar hunt in the snow. I'm like, which book is this? Like, what happens with this particular boar hunt? Because it's just a like, staple knights thing, but it's also, like, a Greek myth thing. So, like, one of the, I think Nobody's Princess? I think it's Nobody's Princess has, like, the boar hunt in Atalanta. But no, if you want an adventure book with a female main character, Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine. If you want an adventure story that is more of a historical fiction with a horse main character, not as cool as Tug, Blood Red Horse by K.M. Grant. It is about the Crusades. Well, it takes place during the Crusades, so the Crusades as a setting is kind of also the Crusades as a character. But it's mostly about the horse. Like, things happen around it, but the horse is the main character, even though the horse can't talk. And then The Drowned Woods by Emily Lloyd Jones is another that is pretty much a straight adventure. There are other elements to that one. I have talked about that one on its own, but yeah. And now for the slide I have to apologize for. Low magic fantasy. All I could think of were the Pern books. So I put Dragon Song by Anne McCaffrey on here. Honestly, pick basically any of the Pern novels. I'm sure there are more. I'm sure I've read fantasy books with little to low magic. But the problem is when I couldn't think of any on my own, and so I did a quick Google, I think I have a different definition of low magic than other people. Or people think that if it's not called magic, it's not magic. Because there were, like, a lot of people saying, the Tortall books, so Tamora Pierce, the Elena books, the Immortals, the Protector of the Small, that those are not, those don't have magic in them, but they do have the gift, which is magic in that universe. It's just not called magic. And the other thing is that I know that it's not magic, but a lot of the things that are like mythology based feel like they're magic. So things like, things like Percy Jackson, things that are about mythology. Those feel like magic, even though it's technically the gods. And like there were some others that were mentioned that are like, oh, these don't really have magic, and I'm like, they do, they just don't call it magic. And I guess that's my thing, is that in the Ranger's Apprentice books, like, they go out of their way to be like, oh no, these things aren't magic, they're this other thing. My other problem, when I was looking for other low magic fantasy, emphasis on low magic, not low fantasy, was that a lot of YA dystopian literature was in there. I don't consider most YA dystopia fantasy. I consider it YA dystopia. Which feels like something separate, because dystopias are typically closer to science fiction to me than fantasy. But yeah. So there were a lot of things that like the internet says are low magic that I'm like, those aren't low magic, they're just not called magic. But no, the Ranger's Apprentice books. So fun fact, let me go back. So this cover. Normally I don't like books with people. Correction. I don't like books with photos on them. It's not my vibe. I don't really like it. Whatever. But because this was the first cover of this I saw, and I was deep in my Legolas, Dritz, Redwall, bows and arrows and Robin Hood are cool. I might have 2005. That might have been the first time I tried to read Lamort de Arthur. This absolutely sold me on it. And I really hate to say it, but I can't stand the new covers. And because I didn't buy all of the books as they came out, because life got in the way, I can't find the covers I like anymore. They've all got the new penguin covers. Penguin? Puffin, I think. They've all got the new Puffin covers, and it's like, oh, those are okay. They're mostly like a single emblem or image for the Ranger's Apprentice books, and then I haven't seen the new Brother Band ones, but Royal Ranger still has illustrations, and I'm like, how come they get illustrations? It's like, wait, no, give me illustrations for the Ranger's Apprentice. I really like it. Also, because I bought them as they were coming out, I've got some in paperback and some in hardback, and I don't have like a nice set. But if I bought a nice set now, I wouldn't like the covers, so it's not worth it to me. I would be more okay with like the Brother Band set, even if the covers were meh, because I don't own any of Brother Band, than Ranger's Apprentice. Oh, the other thing is, when your main character's name is Will, expect puns off of that. Especially when when his teacher's name is Halt. But yeah, I really like this series. It's a pretty quick read. if you're not a huge fantasy nut and you just like a bit more actiony stuff, is pretty good for that. It is kind of like a very kid-friendly version of Assassin's Apprentice. I mean, a very kid-friendly version. I mean, he's not an assassin, but a lot of similar things are taught in this one, or beginning to be taught. Also, tangent. That's another book that like was listed was the Farseer trilogy, which is the assassin books I've been reading. Those have magic in them, like all over the place. Again, it's not called magic, but it's all over the place. I don't understand why just because something isn't called magic, people are like, oh, it's not magic, it's wit. Oh, it's not magic, it's the gift. It's like, so? Something doesn't have to be called magic for it to be magic. It's like, I have a hard time with fantasy that doesn't have fantastical elements being called fantasy. That's my... So that's why, as I say, The Ranger's Apprentice, as it goes on, feels less like a fantasy and almost more like a historical fiction, except it's not, because it doesn't take place in a real world. It has real world parallels, but it's not on the real world. But yeah, it's like, oh, it can't be magic, it's not called magic. It absolutely can't be magic. Like, it could be called Pickles McGee, and if Pickles McGee made things glow, Pickles McGee would be magic. Well, and like, then there was... So I went down a rabbit hole. I was really trying to find something other than Pern, and like, Pern is absolutely fantasy. It is dragons. It is the Studio Ghibli kind of fantasy, because it is a post-sci-fi fantasy. If you know anything about the Pern books and anything about Pern, specifically the ones that by Anne McCaffrey as opposed to the later written ones, as you read through the series, you find out that there was like space exploration and all beforehand, and the spaceship landed, and that's where all the people are from, and they discovered stuff, and like dragons. Trying to be as spoiler free as possible about the entire Pern series. And so by the time like Dragonflight shows up, the first book in the actual series, they've forgotten all of that. That's so long ago that they don't remember being from space. They don't remember the space travel bits. Which is why I say it's like the Studio Ghibli fantasy, because a lot of Studio Ghibli is like post-war and rebuilding, and like the war is usually very science heavy, and the rebuilding is technically a lot more natural, if not fantastic. I'm thinking of like Castle in the Sky. So yeah, but Ranger's Apprentice isn't like that. It just slowly loses its like fantasy elements. Cause like I bet most people would be like, the same people who are like, oh, the skill and the gift and wit aren't magic, would probably also look at oh, what is the other one? Squire's Tales. That has fae and fairies in it, and be like, oh, that's not magic either, they never say magic. It's like, no, they don't say magic, but it's magic. I don't have to call it magic. Sometimes it's interesting to not call it magic. Like, that's another thing, is that fantasy is a lot of things. So I am typically a reader of high fantasy. I like the stories where it's less of a there and back again type of thing, and more of a the fantastical world is the world. But I have read more some. I have read my fair share of fantasy that are low fantasy and greatly enjoyed them. I try not to be too much of a fantasy snob in that sense. Although I will say, if your magic is silly and fun, I am more likely to enjoy it. If your magic is super strict and like can't do fun things, like if you can't use your magic to like do pranks and practical jokes without hurting someone, I'm not interested in that usually. Because going back to Tamora Pierce, because she is one of my go-to authors. In her Imelin series, her Pebbled Imelin? They don't all take place in Imelin. I never know what to call that series. The ones that aren't Tortall. In her ones that aren't Tortall, the Circle of Magic crew and all those people. Their magic is based off of like normal everyday objects, stuff like cooking, stuff like plants, stuff like needlework of all kinds. But they use it to like, the kids use it like kids, and the adults sometimes use it as pranks, and sometimes use it as a serious tool. But that's the whole point, is that it's magic that can be used as both a serious tool and like a haha funny prank thing. I don't really enjoy it when the magic is so strict and so serious that it can only be used for these great things. Lord of the Rings. I'm talking about Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings. I love the fact that the elves are funny and silly and use their magic in somewhat funny and silly ways. As much as I don't like reading the Shire scenes all the time, I like the fact that when the hobbits have magic things, like, they try to do silly stuff with them, usually badly. Or they ask for things that one wouldn't normally ask for. But then there's Gandalf, who clearly uses magic only for serious things, and I couldn't care less. I don't like Gandalf's magic, much like I don't like Galadriel's magic, for the same reason. She's super serious about it all. Meanwhile, Elrond and in The Hobbit, Thranduil. Gee, it is a day. I promise I know my fantasy people. Anyway, they are more lighthearted and happy and just cheerful about it. Like, magic is big, but also magic can be fun. I think it's the biggest argument that, like, people who don't like Tom Bombadil is because he's insanely powerful, but like, he sings about his boots of yellow and like how weird and silly, and why do we need him in these stories? And it's like, okay, but also he loves his wife and he's fun and funny and powerful, and that's a lovely combination. And I like that. I like it when magic can be used for fun. It's part of why I like D&D. You have like super fancy magic like chain lightning that's basically only going to be used for destructive purposes. Maybe a really rad light show if it's not gonna hurt anybody, but like mostly destructive purposes. And then you've got like prestidigitation and thaumaturgy and minor illusion, which all can have useful, can be useful, but they can also just be a lot of fun. And I'm all for things just being a lot of fun. It's why like I know a lot of people will try to use utility spells in combat, if possible. But sometimes it's fun to try to use combat spells for utility. But yeah, I really like stuff like that. I'm trying to think. Like, even Graceling has graces, which aren't technically magic, but they are. Yeah, that's the thing, is I think I am very much of the opinion that if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So if it looks like magic and it acts like magic and it feels like magic, it's magic. Like, as much as I love the Young Wizards books that are very science and math heavy in their magic, they're absolutely magic. They don't shy away from that. A, they're called the Young Wizards series. But B, magic has a cost, and it's a high cost. And as you get older, in the Young Wizards books, most wizards are very young. And the younger you are when you become a wizard, the more powerful you are. And this is true across species. But as you age, your knowledge of magic becomes greater, but your actual, like, magic power cell diminishes. So, for example, if a 12-year-old became a wizard, they would basically be it would kind of be like turning on a sun and sitting next to it. But then, like, by the time they turned 15, that sun would have dimmed. Like, probably to sitting directly next to a massive bonfire. Still wildly bright and wildly uncomfortable, but you are not automatically incinerated. I forgot why I started explaining the Young Wizard series. Oh, there was some reason I was explaining that as they get older. Oh, so as they get older, their magic becomes less. They just have access to less stores of it. It's not, but their knowledge of how to use it is greater. So you will see younger wizards, like newer wizards, doing more frivolous, fun things with it. And then the older wizards will kind of be your theoretical wizards. Because they have all the knowledge, they just don't have the power. So, like, they can do all the theory and, like, give it to the younger ones and be like, go, power this spell. It is massive and important. A lot of the Young Wizards books, they use the moon as their staging ground for a lot of magic, and it's really fun. I highly recommend that one if you like a lot of science in your magic. But you've also got a wink and a nod, kind of. Maybe more than kind of. To things like Knight Rider and Kit with the car. And you've got a nod to, like, Hitchhiker's Guide with whales. And I don't know if that's explicitly what they are, but that is very much the vibe they give. And you've got the wizard that's good with mechanical things, and then you've got the wizard that's good with living things, and you have a technology wizard, which is different from a mechanical wizard because it's digitized things, so things like computers and all, versus things like, mechanical things, cars and televisions and garbage disposals and VCRs. And look, if you don't get the updated version, it's pre-2001, so like these are things that existed. Let's see, other books that have magic that's not called magic? Oh. Off the top of my head, I don't have any. Um, Look, there's a reason I didn't include Aragon. I don't like Aragon. I'm not going to recommend Aragon. I don't enjoy Aragon. So if you like it, power to you. But it's not a recommendation from me. Well, like there was a lot of discussion. Like I said, I was looking for like other books, and there were some that kept popping up, but I didn't know anything about them. So it's like, I'm not going to recommend something that I don't know anything about. I was hoping to see one that I'd read and could remember, which is why when I saw the ones I've read that actually have magic, I'm like, those are magic. But like, they're like, oh, well, monster books are technically fantasy. And I'm like, well, I mean, yes, kind of. Like, I guess supernatural paranormal are technically fantasy. They have fantastical elements. But, like, I wouldn't consider Dracula a fantasy book. It's definitely a gothic horror. Feel. Yeah. So, like, I don't know if I would consider, like, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or Frankenstein or any of those, like, fantasy. Even though, like, fantastical things happen. It's like, where do I draw the line? Like I said, the Dragon Riders of Pern books, I was like, well, it takes place on a fictional planet, but there's really not any magic. But there are dragons. But all of the, like, magical things about dragons, with the exception of the telepathy, there is the telepathy that isn't explained. But, like, every other, like, magical thing about dragons is kind of explained away. They chew certain rocks so they can breathe fire. Okay. They can fly because they are dragons. Alright. The telepathy is about the only thing that isn't explained. And even then, for the most part, it's just between the dragon and their rider. There are a couple of special people. But even then, it doesn't seem to... It seems to kind of be a genetic quirk, not necessarily a... magic. So... I will say, he shows up at the end of this book. But one of my favorite characters in this series shows up briefly in this book, and I think he's a big deal in the next one. But he's one of those characters that's an exception to the rule. Like, on paper, I should hate him. But in practice, he's just a delight to be around. And it's one of those characters where they are very optimistic, and they are very much jokesters. But they are very talented and they know it. But they don't like show it off, but they're kind of good at a lot of things. Um, and like, that sounds so annoying. And like, to be fair, Will is a little bit like that. But like, Will has his moments of being a 15-year-old brat and like trying to show things off, but he's also a 15-year-old. Like, it's not the best trait for him to have, but you can't deny that the kid's 15. So, but yeah, there's another character who shows up towards the end, um, who is kind of like if Robin Hood had a sword in addition to a bow. Um, so he's very witty. He's very good. Um, and like he's one of those characters that, like, if I listed out all of his qualities, he'd be as exceedingly annoying. But like the way he's written, he doesn't come off as annoying. He doesn't come off as a Mary Sue. Um, and because he's willing to listen, learn, and follow orders, he feels like a person. Like an exhausting person to be around in the real world for sure, but like to read about, he's just wonderful. Um, if I remember correctly, gosh, if you stick with the series, I do think there becomes a romance plot. Wow, those words don't go in that. A romance plot will develop if you stick with the series, if I remember correctly. I'm very tired. I'm so sorry. My brain is not firing on all cylinders. But it's not really a big deal for the first couple of books because, like, Will is 15. To be fair, that might be why there aren't. Yeah. Um, yeah, we'll just leave it at that. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. More coffee. But yeah, I'm not sure what I'm going to read for next time. I may grab another new one. I don't know which one I'm grabbing. Let's see. It'll be September. There's a couple I could pick. I will say, I was going through my bookshelf the other day, and I think I've mentioned it before. I can't really cover graphic novels because so much of them is the art and the illustration, and like the copyright on that is really really strict, and I don't want to cause any trouble. But like, I bought Third Shift Society, and I really enjoy Third Shift Society, and like I have Punderworld, and like I've got like, and those are webtoons, but they have physical books, and then like I have the Critical Role graphic novels, and I've got things like Death Vigil by Sejak. Sejak? The guy who's really good at drawing redheads. He did art for Aquaman for a while. But Death Vigil was his own project. But yeah, I love them so much. I would love to like kind of just like talk about them and gush and show them off, but I can't because they're graphic novels, so a big part of them is the illustration. And it's one thing if I just show you a book cover and be like, hey, I don't own this, and here's the person who does, and here's the other things they've done, but it's like, it's a significant part of the actual thing. But yeah, if you like mythology, Punderworld is a retelling of Hades and Persephone, and it's funny. And then Third Shift Society is supernatural. Like Ichabod is your main, not your main character, but one of your main companions. He's a main character, but he's not the main character. So yeah, I will. I think I will let you go, because I am very tired. I'll see you in 2 weeks with something new. Have a good night.